Welcome to Mindset Matters Book Club YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries. Today, we are undertaking a really critical deep dive that we've tailored just for you. We're focusing on a book that holds a mirror up to this really complex intersection of faith, appetite, and the female body. We are diving into Famished. It's an extraordinary book that meticulously tracks the deeply entangled relationship between purity culture, diet culture, body shame, and what she calls religious trauma.
It really is a profound and, an intensely personal exploration. The author has basically given us a roadmap to understand how these overwhelming external systems, cultural and religious control, how they don't just affect the mind.
Right.
They manifest physically. They control how we eat, how we move, how we even understand our own desires. And the core of this whole analysis is the author's own journey, which is just so powerful. It charts her life from a fundamentalist upbringing in Appalachia right through to motherhood and then ultimately onto a path toward healing, both psychological and physical.
And here is our mission for you today. We are going to extract the essential insights from this work. The central and frankly terrifying theme of Famished is this relentless, impossible pursuit of perfection.
Right.
And it's rooted in this idea that if you can strictly control your appetites, and that means food, sex, or just desire itself.
Anything, really.
Anything,
Yeah.
Then you believe you can control your entire world. And the goal of this control is so often self-diminishment. It's about making yourself smaller, less visible, and through that, feeling safer and somehow morally superior.
And we really have to remember the stakes that the author was taught were at play here.
Oh, absolutely.
In that formative environment, failing to be perfectly small and pure. It wasn't just about social awkwardness or, a bad outcome.
No.
It was framed as life or death. Spiritual damnation on one side, physical violation on the other. And this impossible pursuit, it just creates this paralysis where the body becomes a battleground for your own salvation.
Okay, so let's unpack this. This architecture of control, starting right where the author's story begins, her childhood environment. She paints this incredibly vivid picture of growing up within an Appalachian fundamentalist church,
Right.
one that rigidly enforced purity culture and these really strict binary gender roles. In that setting, austerity and abstinence, they weren't just like recommended virtues.
Oh, no. They were the absolute highest indicators of your spiritual health, the gold standard.
And the geographical location itself, living in the mountains, that was actively leveraged as a tool.
A tool of spiritual isolation.
Exactly.
The whole community was aiming to remain in the world but not of the world, which fostered this real separation and suspicion of anything outside their rigid system.
It's like a bubble.
It's a total bubble.
Yeah.
And that physical isolation just reinforces the mental isolation, making the internal rules the only reality that matters. It creates a constant state of hypervigilance where the whole external world is just deemed contaminated and dangerous.
And that hypervigilance is so key. The book draws this stunning parallel later on when she talks about her experience during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. All of a sudden, the entire secular world was adopting a mindset she knew intimately. The fear of breath, the fear of touch.
The obsession with contamination and purity.
Right, the retreat into these strictly controlled spaces.
And what's so fascinating there is that this global health crisis, it basically mirrored her childhood spiritual crisis.
That's a great way to put it.
The stakes were, once again, life or death, and the response was identical. Control the body, control the environment, achieve purity at all costs. And that recognition allows you, the reader, to see how deeply embedded that high-control psychological framework really was for her. It was a survival mechanism that just kicked in during any perceived existential threat.
And inside that environment, she was dealing with this paralyzing contradiction when it came to authority.
It's just impossible.
On one hand, she was taught to fear men, to view them as potential sources of danger. The whole requirement of wearing shorts under your skirt was always tied back to preventing men from stumbling. Volunteers in the church nursery, they had to be viewed with suspicion unless their wives were right there.
But then, at the same exact time, these same men were elevated. They were presented as the absolute authority, the face of God on earth. And that creates an unbearable cognitive dissonance. You're being taught that the ultimate source of spiritual and moral authority is also the ultimate source of physical danger.
You can't win.
You can't. And questioning that authority, or even just speaking up about the danger, it wasn't just unsafe socially, it was seen as questioning the entire divine order itself.
So the lesson that was internalized by all the young women was just inescapable. Since authority can't be questioned and danger is always present, the only variable you can possibly control is yourself.
Exactly. And that leads us straight into the purity mandate and this idea that the female body is an inherent liability.
The weight of this mandate was applied. I mean, not just subtly. It was explicit. It came from the pulpit and through these widely distributed, best-selling Christian books.
Yeah, she names them. Mark Driscoll's Real Marriage, Stephen Arterburn's Every Man's Battle.
Right. And the message was just unwavering. Women have to police their bodies, their clothes, their appearance, all to prevent their husband's eyes or body from wandering.
So the entire burden of male temptation and any subsequent failure was placed squarely on the woman's presentation.
To really bring this idea home, the book details some of these sermon illustrations that were, they were horrifically visceral.
Hard to read.
So premarital sex, or any perceived loss of physical purity, was described in terms of irreversible damage, making a woman's body like a glass of dirty water or a used piece of chewing gum.
And the most common one she mentions, and the most disturbing, was comparing the female body to food, something passive, just waiting to be consumed by men.
The author, Mallory, she described the resulting psychological state as living in states of contradiction.
And you can see why.
They were told that focusing on the body was vanity, it was a sin, and yet
they had to obsessively monitor it, guard it, police it constantly to, keep it, to make sure it didn't tempt someone or stray.
So the body becomes the ultimate paradox.
Absolutely. The source of sin and the proof of righteousness, all depending on how tightly you could control it.
And the ultimate coping mechanism, then, was the internalization of self-control.
It had to be.
The belief was that if men posed this threat of violation, then the woman's only defense was perfect self-regulation.
If she was perfectly disciplined, perfectly covered, perfectly pure, then maybe, just maybe, she could prevent that external violation.
The body was the site of failure.
So it had to be minimized.
And this whole path toward self-minimization leads us to one of the most revealing and, frankly, bizarre anecdotes of her girlhood.
Oh, yeah.
The author's adolescent obsession with the Sparks the Fat Project contest. This wasn't just some typical teenage fascination.
No, it was a full-on psychological study for her, a study of power and disappearance.
This contest completely captivated her when she was only 12. It featured a girl named Nicole, a thin former homecoming queen, who was attempting to ruin her good looks by intentionally gaining 30 pounds in 30 days, all for a $3,000 prize.
And you have to understand Nicole's motivation to get why the narrator was so fascinated.
Right.
Nicole wasn't just trying to gain weight for fun. She was tired of being judged for her beauty, which she felt was her only source of power and attention.
So by making herself fat?
She wanted to disappear. This resonated so powerfully with the narrator's own hidden desire to become less visible, to shed the liability of her body's attractiveness.
The spectacle of it was just terrifyingly detailed. Both Nicole and her male counterpart, they fasted to lower their starting weight.
To maximize the gain. Right.
Maximize the gain. And then came the gorging. 3 large pizzas in one sitting, 2,200 calorie shakes from GNC, Pop-Tarts, Little Debbie cakes.
The absolute antithesis of the austerity she's hearing about in church.
Exactly. And the whole process was documented with daily weigh-ins and these explicit photos taken in Violet Victoria's secret briefs.
And she mentions that those were the exact same style of underwear the narrator owned.
Which made the whole experience feel intense, almost shamefully personal for her.
And the website moderators, they basically acted as the societal police force, reflecting the very judgment Nicole was trying to escape.
Oh, they were brutal.
They openly mocked her. They commented on her true sign of her commitment to dumpiness and her gurgling thighs.
I remember that line.
They speculated just viciously about her moral decay, imagining her future as this 200-pound housewife whose only company was 6 Heinekens and a box of bonbons by noon.
Wow.
So her attempt to escape judgment through gaining weight just resulted in a different, more pervasive kind of ridicule.
The author experienced this profound internal conflict watching it all happen.
I can only imagine.
On one hand, she was titillated by Nicole's expanding body, this visible, thrilling embrace of appetite, her thighs touching, her belly spilling over the elastic.
It was a peek into a forbidden freedom.
A completely illicit peek. But on the other hand, she was instantly disgusted, examining what the moderators called the dark side of Nicole. which just confirmed that indulging your appetite leads to grotesque exposure and moral failure.
So the major takeaway for the narrator was this confirmation that the female body was, in fact, a trap with no escape.
Yeah.
Nicole tried to surrender her power by becoming less attractive, but she only became a target of ridicule. It just confirmed that her body was always going to be policed, no matter what its size was. The only acceptable path was controlled reduction.
And this brings the tension between the spiritual ideal and worldly desire so sharply into focus. Inside her school, the aesthetic of godliness was enforced through this really strict dress code. It demanded feminine and long and loose attire.
Think ankle-length denim skirts, shapeless boxy tops.
Exactly. Thinness was implicitly placed right next to godliness. A smaller body suggested higher control.
But the outside world was constantly creeping in. It was visible through things like Delia's catalogs, which showed these happy, sophisticated models.
Right.
And MTV's Total Request Live, where thinness, personified by Britney Spears' coveted abs, was explicitly marketed as the key to happiness and freedom.
So you have this impossible aesthetic paradox.
The instructions were completely contradictory.
Cover your body to prevent male temptation. She even cites 1 Timothy 2.9 about women adorning themselves modestly, which confirms her flesh is a danger.
Right. But at the same time,
she had to be attractive but not sexy to fulfill her ultimate life purpose, attracting a husband, the promised savior and reward.
And that performance, it just required walking a razor's edge. She had to be noticed, but not too noticed. She needed to be available for marriage, but completely unavailable for temptation.
It's a superhuman effort.
And this superhuman effort of control was the only way to navigate that environment. She had to exert perfect self-control to win the game, believing perfection was actually possible if she just worked hard enough at it.
So this external pressure cooker of contradiction, it inevitably led the author to internalize the law.
Of course.
And she turned her body into an idol, establishing this complex, secret system of disordered disciplines that allowed her to feel like she was winning the control game.
The big moment of realization for her came during a chapel sermon on heart idols.
Right.
You know, the things we prioritize over God. Usually the list is television, sports, sex.
The usual suspects.
The usual suspects. But she realized her own secret demanding idol was her body and the number on the scale. She felt constantly consumed by its demands and its weaknesses, consumed by the very physicality she was being taught to transcend.
So her body became the ultimate battleground. And this was fought out through these incredibly specific hidden behaviors that the book details with just painful clarity. We see the author throwing away her turkey sandwich lunch for weeks, hiding the discarded food in bathroom stalls so no one would see.
And she spent hours in the basement religiously playing and replaying Taibo workout videos, just punishing and perfecting her physical form.
And there were other rituals too. Cutting her dinner steak into impossibly tiny pieces to slow down consumption and reduce her overall intake.
A clear sign of control, just overriding natural appetite.
And the most heartbreaking detail for me, secretly chewing up powdered donuts. The ultimate forbidden pleasure.
And then spitting them into the toilet before bed?
Exactly. She got to taste the forbidden food without absorbing its calories. It was the ultimate loophole in her internalized law.
And then there were the hundreds of sit-ups she did, just in case.
Just in case.
Which just captures the sheer relentless anxiety of that pursuit. She felt this profound shame about her hunger, all need, believing that her neediness just exposed her sinfulness and her lack of spiritual discipline.
But there was a powerful paradox here too. Because despite the shame, she felt a secret, powerful pride in her embodied existence.
Right.
Her constant focus on her body, even in secret, was this quiet resistance to that she be purely spiritual or angelic.
She was a physical creature with desire, despite being told otherwise, and this control, it made her feel powerful.
The ultimate goal of all these secret rituals was to be airy, light, without any real demands of the world or others, hoping to be above reproach, both morally and physically. And this perceived lightness was completely synonymous with godliness, an attempt to transcend the shameful, heavy physicality of womanhood and desire.
And this pervasive need for control wasn't just private. It fueled a whole culture of external judgment, often masquerading as concern over legalism.
Yeah.
The women, she says, found it thrilling to have permission to judge others for being too good. It effectively established this competitive piety.
And that often played out through food rituals at church potlucks, right?
Absolutely. Whether it was choosing the smaller dessert plate or, ostentatiously piling your plate high with raw vegetables, it was all a performance.
And the author herself, she developed this extensive, arbitrary set of personal rules that functioned like a private religious law for her.
Rules that made no logical sense, but were, to her, spiritually binding.
Exactly. Thou shalt not eat at restaurants because of the unknown, uncontrollable calorie counts. Breakfast was fine, but lunch was not.
And Pilates counted toward her required exercise, but just walking around did not.
What's so crucial to understand is that these rules were often only fully realized when someone asked her to break them.
Right, which reveals how deeply subconscious the control had become.
Adherence to these arbitrary laws demanded an orderly, predictable life, which turned spontaneous events like vacations or invitations to eat out into sources of incredible, paralyzing stress.
And this intense, disordered focus was culturally reinforced. It normalized behavior that was clearly a symptom of distress.
Like the math teacher she mentions, who was bragging openly about eating only a couple hundred calories a day before her wedding to fit into her dress.
And that wasn't presented as disordered behavior.
No, it was a sign of dedication and superior willpower.
And even the academic environment participated in this normalization.
Yeah, the extra credit assignment to log calories for a week.
Which she was gratified by, not scared of. She felt validated because she'd already been obsessively logging everything in her secret burgundy mead notebook for months.
So her disorder perfectly aligned with and was validated by the culture she was immersed in.
And the fear underlying all this control was the fear of being seen.
The fear of becoming too big or revealing too much.
Which was explicitly linked to danger and violation.
That link is just solidified by the anecdote of Judy, the realtor friend. Judy's family fled their home after an intruder violated it, and Judy's face had been visible on promotional billboards all over the area.
And her mother's comment was just this chilling, explicit warning: you should never put your picture up on a billboard.
The message was crystal clear.
Visibility equals vulnerability. A woman becoming too big, revealing too much, had terrifying consequences: physical violation, shame, exposure.
It's really no wonder, then, that this constant anxiety about visibility made the idealization of extreme thinness, even to the point of sickness, seem like the safest, most powerful option.
Absolutely. The author describes a girl named Sierra, a high school girl who had been noticeably stretched and then shrunk, trading the roundness and vulnerability of girlhood for what the author calls adult minimalism.
Sierra represented the perfected state of disappearance.
And the adult community's reaction was so complex and contradictory.
The moms in the first place weight loss ministry would discuss Sierra's protruding ribs and how sick she looked.
They used language that suggested disapproval.
But the narrator's internal thought was, I thought she looked great.
Because Sierra represented the achieved goal, safety through hyper-control and near disappearance.
This idealization led to what she calls the drama of accountability within the youth group, where the older kids planned an intervention to make her eat.
Right.
And the narrator witnessed Sierra tearing off a piece of pizza crust, eating it slowly as a performance, and then darting into the hallway to discard the rest of the slice.
So the performance of consumption was mandatory. The actual consumption was optional.
That ritualistic deception just confirmed the necessity of outward compliance, masking inner control.
And the ultimate perverse validation of her disordered behaviors came from being seen, even critically, by a boy.
Yeah, Noah, the boy she chatted with online. When he assessed her body and warned her, I don't want you turning into Sierra, she felt a shiver of pleasure in being seen.
But that attention immediately translated into compulsive self-punishment.
Her immediate need to go for a run in the dark after that just shows how quickly external validation fueled her internal compulsion.
And this is key. She was drawn to the disappearing body because it was communicating something she couldn't say aloud. She obsessively watched reruns of Growing Pains just to observe Tracy Gold's character, Carol, waste away on screen because she was convinced that her body was speaking something.
So disappearance became her language of dissent.
A quiet protest against a culture that told her she needed to be quiet and small. She performed the smallness they demanded, but she chose the method, and that gave her a sense of control.
So as the author moves into adulthood and goes away to a public university, she experiences this fragile, tentative freedom.
And the relief of being outside that fundamentalist bubble was profound for her.
No dress code, no sermons,
Mm-hmm.
and the clarity to finally see the shape of the cage clearly.
She rejected that core fundamentalist fear that secular education would make her brain fall out.
Right.
And this freedom allowed for these cautious little steps toward desire. The first taste of forbidden pleasure was just monumental.
The buffalo chicken flatbread.
The buffalo chicken flatbread with blue cheese dressing, ordered on a blind chance, and she was just overcome with how delicious it was. It was a physical, sensory rebellion against decades of rules.
She started dropping the rigid, arbitrary rules. She ate late-night sugary cereal, went to parties where she danced and drank and didn't worry about liquid calories.
And for a time, that compulsive, critical voice would become quiet.
But the deep conditioning around her body made true intimacy incredibly difficult.
Of course.
She felt immense pressure to just get it out of the way. Dating, kissing, but her social skills were rooted in performance.
And that humiliating first date,
Oh, where she just blurted out, "So tell me your testimony."
which just demonstrates how deeply that script of religious performance was integrated into her relational life. She just didn't have the language for normal connection.
And the most painful consequence of purity culture really manifested profoundly in her intimate life, showing how the mind's control translates to physical dysfunction.
Yeah.
She was shocked to realize she physically could not use a tampon.
A struggle that lasted 5 long years until after her first child was born.
And this physical guarding led to painful intimacy in marriage.
Vaginismus, which is the persistent or recurrent involuntary spasm of the muscles surrounding the outer third of the vagina, making sexual intercourse painful or even impossible.
The body, which was trained for years to clench, to guard, and to view itself as a potential source of sin and temptation.
It just refused to relax and accept this new, supposedly sanctioned desire, even with her husband's patience.
Even when she was discussing the pain of sex, her initial reaction was rooted in her conditioning. She was focused entirely on her husband's experience, saying, "I want it to be good for you."
And it was a devastating moment of realization for her when she finally grasped it's not going to be.
It just shows how deeply embedded the idea was that her body was primarily for the man and not for her own pleasure or self.
And this deep history of body policing made the fear of pregnancy and the anxieties of expansion central to her experience.
The primary conscious fear during this time was the terror of her belly expanding into a round, monstrous shape.
And even with medical knowledge and precautions, that decades-long dread of ballooning bigger and bigger just overrode any logical knowledge or medical reassurance.
Then came the devastating feedback loop of what she calls the praise trap.
This part is so important.
After the birth of her first child, the narrator dropped below her pre-pregnancy weight.
And that triggered an overwhelming flood of compliments.
"You look even better than before." And she describes the shock of realizing that no accomplishment at work, no personal milestone seemed to elicit as much applause as I received for shrinking myself.
And that was such a critical moment because that external validation instantly reinforced every single disordered behavior she had ever practiced.
Yeah.
It told her, this is where your value lies. This is the performance that wins the applause.
And the church environment amplified this pressure. She witnessed the duplicity of people praising pregnant women to their faces while mocking their physical changes behind their backs.
This internal pressure just reached a peak during her second pregnancy with her son, Alex. Fear just consumed her.
She was compulsively weighing herself, spending hours reading articles on how to hide the baby bump.
And whispering apologies to the baby kicking below her ribs.
Apologies for the space he was forcing her to take up.
And this private anxiety was rapidly exacerbated when her entire foundation of stability was just shaken to its core.
Her husband, E., received a mental health diagnosis of bipolar mania.
Which led him to believe God was calling them to sacrifice everything, their house, their cars, their job. He was convinced he was damning their souls by holding on to worldly possessions.
So the world, which was already precarious for her, became utterly unstable.
And in response to that existential instability, the loss of control over her family, her finances, her husband's mind,
She reverted fiercely to her deeply ingrained coping mechanism.
she micromanaged meals and exercised constantly, desperately trying to control the only variable she felt she had left, her body.
This was the peak of her mental health crisis. Her extreme anger, which was rooted in fear and helplessness, it manifested violently. She describes screaming at E, "You're my problem," throwing a toy and then a wooden chair against the wall when Alex cried.
A desperate physical desire to just be out of her body, off this planet, away from the terrifying mess of uncontrolled desire and chaos.
And E, he rightly suggested she was depressed and needed medication, which she instantly rejected.
Because of the terrifying prospect of weight gain.
And the true devastating cost of being good was illustrated when newborn Alex was struggling to breathe in the PICU. Even in that moment of acute life-or-death family crisis, the narrator's thoughts were lost in calculating how to work off the pasta Alfredo she'd eaten the night before.
And that's not just a lack of focus, that's dissociation. It's a trauma response where the body defaults to the one thing it knows how to control perfectly, even if it's entirely irrelevant to the immediate crisis.
She describes hiding her rituals even in the hospital, compulsively applying hand sanitizer, doing video workouts in the hospital bathroom.
She couldn't relinquish that need for control. And her husband later connected the dots so perfectly. He said, "You probably didn't throw up because you knew throwing up was bad, and you were good. And exercise was very good, so that's how you purged instead."
And this is where we really need to introduce the concept of scrupulosity.
Yes.
It's a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, that's characterized by pathological guilt or anxiety about moral or religious issues.
And the religious environment had instilled this sense of scrupulosity, this constant fear of failing spiritually, which simply translated into an intense fear of failing physically.
Her exercise compulsion was a direct stand-in for her deep religious training.
She basically replaced religious OCD with disordered eating and exercise bulimia. So the path to healing for her, it involved finally connecting all these disparate threads, realizing that her body shame was not some personal moral failing, but a symptom of systems, purity culture, and diet culture that are fundamentally designed to control and suppress female desire.
Through her research and interviews, she discovered this profound overlap.
Yeah.
Many women who were recovering from body shame found their relationship with religion was intricately involved.
And licensed therapists, like Brooke Lamb, who she quotes, noted the explicit connection between disordered eating and sexuality.
Right.
Both are tied to pleasure, body intuition, and desire, all of which high-control religion teaches are inherently bad and must be policed.
It's the rejection of intuition itself.
Exactly.
If you listen to your body's signals for hunger or desire, you're trusting the flesh, which the theology taught was fundamentally corrupt.
So the only safe way was to outsource that control to an external set of rules, whether they came from the pulpit or, the calorie counter.
This realization requires caution, as the theologian Kate Bowler warns.
Yes.
The danger is just swapping one internalized fundamentalism for another. If you move from rigidly policing your eating to rigidly policing body positivity in the exact same black and white way,
you haven't healed the root problem. You've just adopted a new, equally unforgiving moral code.
And the book shows that the church often explicitly sanctioned this disordered control.
Oh, absolutely. Programs like First Place and the Holy Diet formalized the link between holiness and thinness.
They promoted this damaging idea that fat people are fat because they're undisciplined and irresponsible.
So thinness became the visible, outward sign of inward regeneration and obedience to God. It was the perfect religious performance, completely indistinguishable from the secular desire for weight loss.
This prompted a critical dive for her into the historical roots of body shame and the theological tradition of binary dualism.
Mind versus body, light versus dark, man versus woman. This division is ancient.
She learned that historical thinkers, from philosophers like Plato and Descartes, they sought to elevate the mind by creating a scapegoat for all disgusting, desirous urges.
And they traced those urges to a sexual receptacle that also offered food, woman.
It's a narrative as old as Genesis, where Eve eats forbidden food and is cursed with pain in childbirth. The female body is just inextricably linked to temptation, consumption, and suffering.
And this historical context made the author's personal theological shift so monumental. She moved away from Arminian theology, which basically posits that salvation is chosen and dependent on your performance and your works.
A framework that left her constantly vulnerable to losing her salvation if she failed in her perfection.
And she moved toward Reformed or Calvinist theology, where the core concept is that Christ chooses you regardless of your personal perfection.
The revolutionary concept that nothing you can do could change your salvation.
It was a massive relief for a person consumed by the need to perform perfection daily. If God's love isn't dependent on her flawless performance, then the tyranny of the scale and the compulsions of exercise, they begin to crumble.
But even within that grace-centered tradition, she still encountered profound systemic sexism.
Right.
She was forced to confront historical figures like Martin Luther, whose comment that If women become tired, even die, it does not matter, let them die in childbirth, reveals this profound devaluation of female life and suffering.
And this continued through modern expressions, like respected pastors, John MacArthur, for example, telling women Bible teachers like Beth Moore to go home. The underlying message remained the same. Female authority and presence must be contained and minimized.
This realization led to that critical insight about her teenage self.
Yes.
She realized she couldn't challenge the religious authority directly. It just wasn't safe to pose theological questions to the men in power.
So she channeled her dissent into her body.
Her disordered eating was a quiet protest, a nonverbal rejection communicated through her flesh. I'm not hungry.
And that passive, quiet resistance finally needed to transition into active, conscious reclamation. As she moved forward, she had to find new frameworks for viewing herself that resisted that oppressive dualism. She first explored body neutrality.
Right, which suggests that your body is an instrument, not an ornament. It values function over appearance.
But she found that neutrality still felt like suppression. It asked her to suppress her complex, painful feelings about her body and just treat it like a tool.
She recognized that neutrality was still asking someone to not feel at all.
And here's where she finds real liberation in body reflexivity, which is proposed by the philosopher Kate Mann. This concept asserts, my body is for me, not for her husband, not for the church, not for her children. It's a radical assertion of ownership and autonomy over her own physical experience.
And she recognized the religious resistance to this idea. That famous, often weaponized verse, 1 Corinthians 6.19-20.
You are not your own, you were bought at a price.
Exactly. Often thrown in the voice of an angry preacher as a gotcha moment to demand submission.
But body reflexivity resists the ranking and judgment imposed by both purity culture and diet culture. It encourages appreciation, viewing the body not as an imperfect object to fix, but like marveling at a sunset's exquisite, unique design, without comparing or critiquing it against some impossible standard.
And crucially, she realized she couldn't just think her way out of these deeply embodied issues. Her body was holding the score.
So the final step was therapeutic intervention, specifically EMDR therapy.
All right. EMDR stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing.
It's a psychotherapy technique designed to help people heal from trauma or other distressing life experiences.
And by focusing on external stimuli, like eye movements, while recalling traumatic memories, the therapy helps the brain process the trauma and retrain the body's subconscious reaction.
For the author, this meant addressing the specific physical trauma responses linked to church. Her heart racing during hymns, her palms sweating during altar calls.
And this allowed her to stay within her faith, rejecting the black and white binary that demanded she either leave entirely or become perfectly compliant.
Her choice was to remain and redefine grace. And this redefinition allowed her to shift her focus outward, to modeling change for her children.
She became hyper-aware of her language around her sons, worrying when her son Graham used the language of duty, saying, I want to get some exercise.
Right.
So she focused instead on teaching boundaries and consent, modeling a healthy relationship with her body so they could grow up knowing that no means no and stop means stop, both physically and emotionally.
And the book closes with this powerful narrative connection to the biblical story of Queen Vashti and Queen Esther.
A powerful metaphor for visibility and choice.
Vashti chose to disappear. She valued her modesty and refused the king's demand to be displayed and gazed upon. She chose self-diminishment in the service of modesty.
But Esther, her replacement, made a different choice.
She chose to appear, to speak, and crucially, to request a feast, an indulgence and a risk that ultimately saved her people.
She used her visibility and her body as a tool of agency, not of submission.
By choosing to be seen, to indulge in the feast, and to speak aloud, Esther was rewarded with purpose. And the author's final wish reflects this. To be seen, not just for herself and her own healing, but for her sons and for all women who were told they needed to be quiet and small. She wanted to move forward with a life that was abundant, messy, and visible. #outro.
This book is, it's a critical exploration of systemic control. And the central discovery, which took the author decades to reach, is that the path to freedom was never about perfecting the body or eliminating desire.
It was about rejecting black and white thinking, learning to feel those desires and physical signals, and accepting that the body is simultaneously good, gloriously imperfect, and autonomous.
Healing requires stopping the war against herself and recognizing that her body is not a ledger of sins and debts, but a vulnerable, visible, and deeply intelligent mechanism for being present in the world. It's about accepting that the body is not just a site of control, but the primary site of her freedom.
The final scene of the book just perfectly embodies this hard-won piece. The narrator is on vacation, finally present, lounging with her family,
Eating glazed and jelly-filled pastries.
fully indulging the previously forbidden appetite and successfully resisting the urge to check the step count on her phone.
She says she is so glad to be here, standing in the surf in her black swimsuit, sun shining on her faint stretch marks, accepting her body as vulnerable and visible, so needy, so uncertain.
And that vulnerability is the key to presence. She has turned down the volume on that internal critic.
And that acceptance allows for true focus on things outside the self. Which brings us back to that George Saunders interview the author references.
Yes, discussing the profound upside of self-diminishment.
Exactly. But when Saunders talks about self-diminishment, he means the opposite of the self-flagellation the author learned in church.
Right. He defines it as turning down the volume on self-centered thinking.
It's not about making yourself smaller physically, but about quieting the noise of the obsessive judging ego.
Which may be the ultimate definition of grace and love in action. It's the goal of turning down the constant counting, the judgment, the performance. If we accept the author's final wish to step away from the mirror and see the face of God in all bodies as the true act of surrender, that raises an interesting question for you, the listener.
If the ultimate goal is not perfection, but rather quieting the noise of self-centered performance, what part of your own life's constant noise, the calorie counting, the judgment of others, the anxiety of performance, what part of that could you quiet today to make space for what is truly good and abundant?